Thanks for tuning in to Pod Catalyst, the official podcast of IABC. Today's episode is sponsored by First Up. If you're still blasting out one-size-fits-all employee emails, it's time for a change. First Up helps global enterprises personalize employee experiences at scale, delivering the right information at the right time through the right channels to activate their most valuable asset, their people. From fragmented messaging to orchestrated journeys, learn more at firstup.io. That's firstup.io. Our conversation today is between Peter Finn, IABC Executive Director, and Christine Elliott, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Moody's, a global financial services company. Christine has a fascinating career, one that started in journalism with ABC News and includes more than 25 years in senior-level corporate communications roles. In her time at Moody's, she certainly accomplished a lot. So whether that's modernizing the communications function, to bringing together several disciplines under corporate affairs, developing the firm's digital content team, and so much more. For those of our listeners who are curious about what it really takes to master the communications function at the C-suite level, Christine has a lot of compelling stories and insights to share, and we really appreciated her taking the time to join us. So let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Christine Elliott, and I'm the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Moody's. And I think communications connects culture and strategy to impact an organization.
Well, welcome, Christine, and thanks so much for joining us on Pod Catalyst.
Thanks.
And I've got to say, I love your wallpaper in the background there.
Well, I'm a diehard Michigan fan, so maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that.
So, during your time at Moody's, you've modernized the communications function, bringing together comms, brand, government relations, community impact, and sustainability under corporate affairs. Certainly a notable achievement. What did that look like in practice?
It looked like a steady stream of continuing to put building blocks together as we went through. I was hired to join Moody's specifically for comms and branding. And over a period of about a year, we brought in community impact, which includes the Moody's Foundation and our volunteerism. And then our CEO, Rob Fauber, said, you know what, we're thinking about the government team, and the messages that are going to policymakers and regulators are similar, tailored, but similar to the messages going out to the media and our employees. And so he really began to think about this idea of a corporate affairs structure and bringing all of these things together. And once we had gotten those three elements, we then added the following year sustainability, which again, it's the same kind of messaging, just thinking about the specific needs of different stakeholder groups and using that to really help all of our stakeholders receive the same messages from the different entities that we were working with. And so, as different teams had different goals and priorities, and we found ways that actually there was a lot more commonality in terms of those priorities and goals than there were differences. And so really finding that common ground and ensuring that everyone was working towards those objectives was where we started to, kind of create lift across the organization, so that one team may have taken the lead in one aspect, but it was used a number of times across the team. So it's the, build it once, use it many times. So there was an efficiency, but frankly, it was really more about just getting that consistency, sort of the repeatable, scalable messaging across all of our stakeholder groups.
And what were some of the challenges or maybe some of the pain points as going through the process?
Well, again, everyone thinks that their unique stakeholder group or their unique way of doing things is so different, it can't possibly relate to the work that another team is doing, or the other team can't possibly know all the ins and outs and peculiarities that a team is dealing with. So really trying to establish that baseline and get through to that common ground was essential. I am very fortunate to have an extraordinarily seasoned team of leaders, and the effective leadership was really critical, because it wasn't enough for me as the head of corporate affairs to try to explain to the comms team why the government team had similar objectives. And while I've worked in a corporate affairs structure a lot. I've never personally been responsible for the policy or the regulatory conversations on a day-to-day basis. And so having my managing directors that have been at a regulator, on Capitol Hill, in an administration, explaining where they see the benefits, that's really where I think we began to kind of have that shared purpose and common objectives.
Yeah. And I know you also developed Moody's digital content team. What have some of the outcomes of this team looked like?
Yeah, we're very proud of this. We call it the Moody Story Lab, and it's
Oh,
where
cool. Yeah.
our premium content comes from.
Yeah.
And the reality was that, and maybe we'll talk about this a little later, as owned content becomes more of a common theme across communications, having experts in the field, whether it's podcast or video or data viz, really bringing that level of excellence to the content that we're creating. We're really proud of the way that has created some boost in terms of our social engagement across our channels. We've seen something like a 17% lift in our web traffic.
Oh, wow. Yep.
65% increase in the social engagement, a really significant rise in the followers and the positive brand sentiment. So that's fantastic. We also developed a brand center for the employees, which really has the one-stop shop that people need. I don't need to worry about where do I go for a template for PowerPoint or for a brochure or for any of these things. It's all in one area. And because Moody's has really, I think, leaned in early and often on AI, we have a brand assistant. So our brand attributes are bold, clear, and perceptive, and you can put in a piece of content and the brand assistant will help you ensure that it is speaking in that tone of voice to make sure it's bold, clear, and perceptive. And that's really a game changer because, there are people who are responsible, not in my team necessarily, but across the company who aren't writers naturally, right? And so giving them that assistance, that little bit of confidence that they're going in the right direction to meet the tone and the verbal identity that we're trying to achieve. And then, I think the other parts of it are the more kind of fun, obvious areas. We created some docuseries. So it's a little bit like Netflix, as much as that can happen for a corporation. The first one was called The Infinite Game. That was shortlisted at Sundance. So that was a really proud moment for us. And just recently this year, we released something called Work From Where, which looks at commercial real estate. And I know this podcast has done some episodes on the future of work and, hybrid and all of that.
Yep.
So that really looks at it from the business angles as well. And, that is 100% produced by our teams in-house. And I think that there's not only a great sense of ownership and pride that comes from the team and, frankly, our colleagues across the company to see that Moody's is producing something like that, but also that the speed that we can operate. I'm not writing a brief that an agency then needs to internalize and going the usual back and forth. So I think the efficiency factor is really high when we're using our in-house teams.
Yeah, so efficiency and I imagine very agile as well, right? So we can just
100%.
Yeah. That's amazing. And so you mentioned own content. I was curious to get your thoughts on how this has changed in the last few years and where you see it going.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you've probably seen this as well. Obviously, I would say, I don't know, I feel like as my career goes on, it's longer and longer the timelines that I'm seeing. But maybe the last 10 years, you see this merging of sort of the marketing and the communications, whereas, frankly, as communicators, I think we're sometimes a little bit snobby about this is earned, and that's very different, very special. But the reality is that, unfortunately, journalism has changed a lot since my days at ABC News, and they don't have the budgets, they don't have the staffing that they had previously. And so there's just not that many outlets that you can use. And so naturally for a corporation, I think finding the right channels, whether that's podcasts, videos, whatever kind of multimedia, was sort of the natural evolution for that. And I think the benefit from a brand perspective is that you get to engage audiences in whatever channel they prefer. And if you're not engaging where they want to be, that it's sort of a missed opportunity anyhow. So I think finding the right audiences, understanding how much time they want to spend, what's the right format for the messages that they're going in. Brands need to be really strategic about how they're ensuring that their content is reaching and, importantly, resonating with whatever audience they're trying to reach. And so, there's an amazing amount of content out there, right? And I don't think any brand thinks that consumers are out there just trying to, oh, I'm really interested in what Moody's is putting out today. That's part of their normal content diet. And so if Moody's can find a way to authentically and interestingly feed into that overall content diet, I hear a lot of people, particularly now, saying, I've just got to take a break. There's just so much coming at me. So it's really incumbent on the brands to make sure that they're doing everything that they can to reflect not only their own perspective, but find a way to make it resonate with that audience.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about, so I know that you earned a certificate in CCO leadership and multi-stakeholder value creation from Yale. Is that through Page or in a partnership with Page? How did this program help you, lean into the business side of your role compared to comms?
Yeah, so I came into it through a different channel. John Iwata is an old and dear friend. And so this was the first time that they were running the program. And so it's possible he just wanted a friendly face in the audience. But it was fascinating. John is obviously one of the heroes of the communications world from all of his work at IBM and now at Yale. And so the stakeholder management group there really is focused on the long-term value. I think, even today we've been talking about audiences. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about was stakeholders. And there's a difference in terms of how you approach a group and whether they're just an audience is sort of a broadcast mechanism, whereas a stakeholder has more of an engagement opportunity. And so I really thought about the different ways that we were utilizing, again, just within my own team, thinking about the different stakeholders that we manage and how we can more effectively share the content in the right format and really identifying more of the issues and opportunities that they're facing. And therefore, how do we best promote the ideas or the proposals that we're trying to put forward? So I found it really invaluable. And of course, the folks there that I was with, we had KPMG and the Hartford and Pepsi and McDonald's. And so just, having that universe of like-minded peers, it's a really fantastic opportunity. So for all of you listening, I would strongly encourage you to find a way, if you can, to engage with that program at Yale.
Yeah, people that I've spoken to that have gone through the program just rave about it. So yeah, that's great. Well, and I know you referenced it earlier, I think, with working for ABC News, but so how did your early career experience in journalism help get you to where you are today?
I didn't know that it would help me get there. I think, a lot of people say, how did you think about your career? And the reality for me was in college, I thought I was going to law school. I had literally spent all summer in Ann Arbor studying for an LSAT and applying to law school and had gotten accepted to law school. But this was the early 90s and President Clinton was in his first term and he ended up doing one of his first town halls from Detroit. And I was doing an internship at WXYZ with Chuck Stokes, another hero of mine. And so it was me and Chuck working with the White House press operation. And at some point, Jeff Eller, who ran media affairs for the White House, said, "Hey, kid, it was great knowing you. If you're ever in Washington, come down." And so I called him and I said, "So what would I do in Washington?" He said, "Well, you'd work 6 days a week. You'd do all of this, but you'd do it for free, but you'd do it in the White House." And so I figured, what, I can go back to law school, but this is probably a once in a lifetime. And as exciting as it was working in the White House and learning from Jeff, who is just, a master communicator of all kinds, I kept wanting to be on that other side and work with the media like I had done in my internship at XYZ. And so I just applied to every job posting because, the internet hadn't actually started working at that point. And so finally I got a job at ABC News and it was the best job I've ever had in my life. I tell my team right now, my job today is fantastic. I'm incredibly privileged, but I never wanted a different job than I had in journalism. The only reason I changed out of journalism was frankly, I was working for Good Morning America, and I was going to work at 10 o'clock at night and coming home at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I was getting married, and my husband was sort of wondering how this was going to work out. And so PR seemed like the other side of the coin. So I think, the best advice I always give to people is you never know where these things are going to end up. Be thirsty, be creative. If it's an opportunity that scares you a little bit, if you're not quite sure if it's ready, then it's probably the exact opportunity you should have.
Yep.
And take some calculated risks along the way. And that in anything, I think that's where you get the best results.
Yeah, and along those lines, I mean, I think it's good advice for folks that are maybe earlier in their career. I mean, are there other things, advice for those that are aspiring to, early in their comms career to kind of reach where you are in your career, to reach the C-suite?
Yeah, and again, C-suite was not a thing that I had in my set of objectives. When I got my first real communications job working for Mike O'Neill and Tom Schick at American Express, it was the most junior comms role that they had. And I remember coming home and saying, like, I don't know what a basis point is. And suddenly I am working in this financial services company. And so I learned along the way. But I think progression is not, I think people say like, oh, okay, I'm at this level and then I'm going to go to that next level. And then that's going to get me a VP title and on and on. And sometimes career progression is linear, and sometimes, you need to go sideways. Sometimes you need to go what seems backwards in order to maybe leapfrog a couple steps ahead. And if I think about how I did actually get to a C-suite, it was really enjoying and leveraging every opportunity I had. I had been given the opportunity to start corporate comms, corporate affairs team for a spinoff when American Express was doing a joint venture with their corporate travel division. And I had every intention of going back to American Express into my regular job after we'd gotten that up and running. And it was only then that a friend said, hey, you've been running your own shop. Maybe you look at something different. And so at that point, I got a call from what was then McGraw-Hill Financial. And they were looking to do some, creative and modernizing of the communications function and to rebrand. And so I was able to work with Doug Peterson and Courtney Godaldig on the S&P Global rebrand from McGraw-Hill Financial to S&P Global. And that opened up a whole different category of experience that I had that I've now, taken to Moody's. And so there's a lot of different ways that, you may not necessarily see the opportunity when it's immediately in front of you, but having the benefit of many long years to look back on now, I've been able to see where different moves have definitely been pivotal in my journey.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And I know you have a big job, but what are you passionate about outside of work?
Well, I used to say that I have two teenage daughters, but one turned 20. So I have two young women in my household who are just incredibly dynamic and inspiring in their own right. My older daughter has spent the entire year in Europe studying abroad. She normally goes to University of Washington in Seattle. And so I've gotten to learn a lot through her eyes. And then my younger daughter is a senior in high school, and she's off to University of Southern California in the fall. And so I think I'm going to be passionate about long distance travel quite a bit. But I also love just spending time with my family. We have a place in Vermont that is kind of my Zen opportunity that, I can feel my shoulders, lowering as soon as I cross the state line. As you noted, I do happen to really love college sports and anything that Michigan is on. I think by the time this episode airs, it'll be about 2,000 days since Ohio State beat Michigan in football. So very proud of that. And I like to bake. So it may not necessarily be a passion, but it is one of those things that kind of centers me, because there's so many things in a job like mine where I may not necessarily be entirely sure of the outcome. But if I put certain ingredients together and in a certain order, I'm reasonably positive about what the thing is going to look like at the end. And that's very affirming.
Yes. I can totally agree with that. Well, great. Well, two kids on the West Coast. You've got some travel ahead of you, right?
Yeah, I try not to take it as feedback, more of the opportunity we've offered them.
Yes. Well, thanks so much, Christine. I really appreciate, getting to know you a little bit and learn about what you do. And thanks for carving out some time for us.
It was a lot of fun,
Yeah.
Peter. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Pod Catalyst, the official podcast of IABC. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Have a suggestion for a future episode? Send us a note at catalyst@iabc.com. To discover all IABC has to offer, visit our website at iabc.com. Until next time.